Interesting. We had an interesting couple of days here. Everybody saw the IP Roadshow kit too, right? Great. Okay. So what did you all learn today? Who wants to volunteer something that they didn't know that they learned today?
I learned that everybody loves ice cream.
Everybody loves ice cream. That's it? Oh, come on. All right. Who has a question for my panel?
And just wiggle your hand, and I can bring a mic around.
So let's go back to 2110. Let's start where we all began here. Are we going to be able to make this work? I'm looking at you, Karl.
Do we have a choice? Oh, yeah. I mean,
There are challenges.
if you parallel this to what we went through with SDI 35, 36 years ago, we're just starting the edge of this.
Yeah.
You know? And we didn't have everything we needed, and certainly not everything we have today when we did SDI. I mean, the first routers weren't even available for 5 years after that standard was completed because silicon couldn't be manufactured very well. We're a little bit beyond that now. So.
I actually made a comment to a number of people that I thought, I'm over 2110, because it feels like we're there now. That things, you know, we've gotten it out there. I think next year we're going to be talking about, you know, really good case studies and examples that, you know, have happened because we are there.
Ah, never mind. That won't work. Yes. So when do you think we'll see 2110 becoming commonplace and SDI being like, really?
Personally, I think we're going to see a gradual transition as manufacturers step up to the plate and put IP like they're doing today as options. But I think probably within 3 to 5 years, we're going to see SDI as options, and IP will be the common base. And that's going to tell the real story.
Yeah, okay.
So long as Supermicro stays in business.
Hey, why aren't they here? Supermicro, they should be here, shouldn't they? So Rob, what's now that you've gone to the cloud?
Real quick.
What's that? Yeah, sure.
So we're in the middle of, you know, we just moved our post facility where I think I addressed this a little bit. Our storage is living in Sterling, Virginia, and our editors edit out of Silver Spring, 38 miles away. And in that entire architecture, there's probably, I would say there's less than 100 SDI cables. I mean, it's at the edge now. It's monitoring. It's at the far end, as far at the end as we can. There's no router in my new facility, no baseband router, I should say.
Well, file-based has been there for a while. I mean, I think from a file-based perspective, we're pretty much migrated into IP, one could argue, but the last time anybody didn't have a network switch in their facility, none of us here probably remember anymore.
Yeah, no.
So I think the last piece of live is really what we're talking about with 2110. And I think what Karl said is it's going to be a transition during manufactured products, basically having both.
Yeah.
And then as soon as there's...
I mean, 10 years ago, we started here. I remember Michelle Prout talking about, we had papers on file-based workflows. That was a key theme. And we talked about the content delivery factory, you know, looking at your stuff like that. And now we're actually looking at the whole supply chain, and it's in the cloud. So we're making these huge transitions, of course. And of course, we're moving away from SDI to IP, what's interesting, though, is one thing I noticed is like in the transition to 2110, we're really changing out infrastructure from SDI to IP, but we're still containing that within our four walls sort of, you know, it's still like in our facility, the 2110. Whereas you move to the cloud, it's much more about being connected into a whole wide range of suppliers and deliverers, you know, so they're two very different models. I mean, one, you know, 2110 is really about inside my premise, you know, and I wonder, you know, if we're not missing the whole point of being more connected in the 2110 world.
But 2110 is live. Let's be very clear.
Yeah.
2110 is all about getting it from live into production or post-production. And so until bandwidth becomes a little bit more practical or available or at least big enough. A couple of weeks ago, we were at a little SVG event And the gentleman from NHL said, let's remember, everybody, I have 14 cameras at 15 facilities. Do the arithmetic. If I'm sending live into the cloud, it's going to rain real fast.
Right?
So, the live aspect of it in Prem handles one thing, where the cloud basis for distribution, I mean, how much DNX 245 editing are you doing in the cloud?
Well, there's the point right there. Even today, we're not storing SDI bandwidth material in any form, anywhere, whether it's cloud or spinning disk or silicon. We're not doing that. We're still relying on the things we do in file-based workflows, and that's get them to a reasonable compression format and store them and ship them around the world that way. I think even if you had infinite bandwidth, that would be an impractical use of your resources.
Yep.
If nothing else, the time that it takes to do that is transfers.
And Renard, what did you hear today that, because you're obviously involved in some interesting projects going forward, that caught your attention? Anything that stuck out to you that's like lights going off?
Yeah, the machine learning and the use of AI for some of your processing and directing some of your processes, I think was pretty cool. Listening to what Rob has gone through, knowing that we're opening the door and getting ready to go through the same thing, it was enlightening. And I'm glad he's getting beat up first, so that it'll be a little bit easier for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Deep pockets.
Yeah,
Yeah, right?
deep pockets. Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And by the way, for those of you who are not PBS members, please give often. But no,
This isn't supposed to be salesy, Renard.
it's always pledge. It's always pledge. But no, I think really what Discovery has done, and where they are is it's really exciting for the industry. They stepped out, they made a commitment, and they said we are going all in. And even when you're talking about 2110 and SDI and so forth, people are not going all in. You're looking for a hybrid way to kind of get there. The step that they made to go all in with the cloud and say this is where we're going to be by 2017, 18, 19, and so forth and so on. I think that's the model that we need to be looking at as broadcasters, is really start to say, you know what, we may not know where we're going to be in 5 years, but we can kind of predict where we're going to be in 3 because we can figure out what manufacturers are going to be able to do based on their cycles. Let's try and figure that out, and then let's try and figure out a real path towards that. So that's what I was hearing from a lot of the presentations today. I loved what Jason just walked through, from the integrator side. How are we going to service, or how is he going to service those of us who are looking for that type of knowledge? And one of the things I was talking about earlier during the ice cream break was, what do you do with your people? There was a lot of talk about all of this great technology and so forth, and how do we start training those people who want to be trained at this point? And then what do we do about making sure that we're ready for that year 3? And once we get there, what do we do with the people who have decided that, maybe this isn't for me?
I was just going to ask John that question, but you beat me to it. But John,
I mean, honestly, we've got a whole business around change management, because we're an industry at a point where the change is really more about people than technology. And it's a combination of training. It's a combination of just following the rules of how do you communicate this stuff out? How do you engage people? How do you find the champions that are going to push this forward? And recognizing that, particularly I think on the technical side, we have some folks that really don't want to go through the change before they retire. And I think we just have to recognize that and help them have a graceful path out.
and it's got to be a challenge sometimes to evaluate the difference between resistance to change versus rational concerns about upending the apple cart as you go there. So I'm curious, like for Jason and Karl, do you, when you meet with customers and they're looking to migrate to the cloud, create new workflows, how much do you do blue sky versus worrying about keeping existing workflows, legacy things that may have some value that you have to figure out where that value really is?
Well,
For us, it's analyzing the balance there, and it's different for every customer, and it's different for every personality that's involved in decision maker. Where we need to really get into the business itself and see what their threshold is for change, and then develop a custom plan every time for what that change looks like. And sometimes the best way to do that change is a wholesale change of a system and rip one out and start all over. Because that's the only thing that will buy a customer into it and their people into it. And other times it has to be really small changes over time and just putting in the platform to be able to do that.
Change management is its own thing.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
understanding adoption is something that's key to any massive change across any industry. And typically, it's hoping that you're working with the champion who wants the change, and then let the change trickle down through sponsors and then people that actually do it. And at that point, you're encouraging people to do it. If you're just buying a new system, putting in new technology because you like new technology, and then don't really encourage people to want to change or at least understand the benefit of the change, then, you can do cool stuff all the time, but it's pretty ineffective.
Yeah, what we run into a lot is we need to have real PMs with a real governance plan and a steering committee, just like you would in any enterprise with change management across any business process, just to adopt new technology. We're in the middle of an integration right now that just completed for another customer where I complimented them in the initial meeting, the kickoff of the project, because they had a group of editors and power users, they had an archivist, they had IT, and they had a director of technology sitting in the room together, and then someone overseeing security as well. And then at one point they brought in their COO and the business manager. And I said, guys, this is amazing. We need to keep this pace up. Everyone needs to be involved in this. And 2 months later, it was going really well, so a lot of them disappeared. And then things started going poorly. And I had to pull them back in and say, no, there's a reason for everyone to be involved in this, because there's change that needs to be managed.
Interesting.
Well, one of the interesting things that happens in going to a new technology is because, and particularly in greenfield sites or major changes, is that you're basically, the owners involved in this are basically told, this is your one shot. This is all the money you're going to get for 5 years, and you better do it right the first time. And that's not a challenge at all. And a lot of times there becomes a rude awakening that says that you really can't afford this based upon your budget. And then miraculously they open up another budget somewhere, or they withdraw the whole project. It's happened. We're going to wait until there's time to do that. But when you're building a major sports stadium that has a timeline that says you've got to be on the air before the first pregame season, and you find out that the technology is just driving you nuts, and it's going to take 20% more time to get it integrated and QC'd and everything, and the saving grace is the roof won't close on the stadium, so it delays the contract and the construction for another 6 months.
Oh, yeah, I mean.
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically.
I mean,
Nobody from Atlanta here, is there?
there are war stories like that. Gene will remember when we launched the Fox News Channel, that they couldn't get beta, digital digi-beta decks, so they had to go to digital VHS. And nobody had digital VHS, but the whole Fox network was built on digital VHS because of that, because they couldn't get enough digi-beta machines in time.
The factory, yeah.
And then they found the heads lasted for 20 years on them or something, So Rob, how did you handle at Discovery? How was that handled there? I mean, because obviously this is a big upheaval for you guys, not teaching your engineering staff about managing the cloud and how the cloud works and understanding how to.
It started, absolutely, and that was, I was surprised that question didn't come up when we were talking, because that was a big part of it, was the buy-in of the teams, and, a lot of traditionals, that's a word, that are on our staff, that didn't want to change. It's a lot of change, how do we do it? And one way was, the full scope, the full range. It was a platform team, it was security, it was IT. Everybody was a part of the decision-making and all in. And the message was repeated and repeated often. And it was, this is what we're doing, this is why. It wasn't just, now, let's go, for the most part. It was, this is why we're doing it. We had, I'll call it the luxury of some aging equipment that we had to replace. And so it was.
Renard understands that.
I say luxury now. So, we had to do something. We had to move. we decided on a move. It was the decision, and it was, half mom and dad telling you because I said so, and half of it, but here's why.
Yeah.
And I think the other part of that is these conversations, because it's that adoption in the community itself. Not so scary. Here's how we did it. We're all in this together. I mean, we're in competition, but are we really? So that's a big part of it, is being able to talk about what we did, what worked, what didn't, and having these conversations, because.
And for everybody else, you guys have paved the way. And I think everybody up here would agree with me on that. You guys made the decision. It's what I call the bet your job decision.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody has to do it first.
John Honeycutt might have bet his job for him, but yeah.
Yes, other people bet my job.
But now everybody can say, look, these guys have done it, and they did it well, and they did it on the schedule they thought, and, there's learnings from that, so.
Renard and I have had that conversation. We've talked to some people who said, well, the cloud isn't ready for play out. You might be able to do DR in the cloud, but you really can't trust it for your play out. And it's like, yeah, I think Discovery's proven that conversation wrong now. We've gotten past that. It's not just some rinky-dink music channel that's only available on the iPhone or something. It's a real network.
The other selling point, if you don't mind me saying, and that is true, we committed, we definitely committed, jumped into the pool before we checked it. But if it was even filled with water. Was,
But it had sharks before it had water.
we wanted to do it as
Yeah.
well. There was something about, being on that bleeding edge. It's attractive. I'm not going to lie. I mean, now that it works, it's fantastic. But there was something to that.
Oh,
as well.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
that was a big selling point.
Well,
This
and
is
you
the next
also in the
generation.
point where
Let's do it.
you had an aging infrastructure that we put in 2005, I think. So at that point, it was like, do I really want to replace all this with something that 3 years from now could be obsolete? I mean, how can I do that kind of forklift? So what choice really was there if you really look at it correctly? But, but to try going to something that was going to have a little more longevity.
Or I put in something that's not obsolete in 3 years and I'm stuck with it for 15.
Yes.
Like I did with my last system.
Exactly.
And everyone else is doing this, and I'm still
Well, exactly, yeah.
an on-premise platform.
Yes.
Watch it.
So your job was either risk then, or it will be if you did that instead, right?
Right, exactly.
One way or the other. Yes, very good. So Gary, you have concerns about as we move into 2110, how we manage some of this, don't you? And do we have the right tools, and do we have the ways of documenting and supporting these systems?
Oh, that.
Yes.
I can try to help you.
Tell us your concerns.
No problem, right? Everybody's got AutoCAD. You put one big line in the middle, that's the network switch. You put a whole bunch of wires in the middle. The spreadsheet is what? Not that big, right, Karl? I mean, you just did fiber at, CNN, and it's just a bunch of fibers going into a, easy, done. What's the big deal? So maybe not. And you did a good start. And I think one of the things that I find entertaining, and I don't think anybody else would, is that I've recently crashed into version challenges, where the version on card A in manufacturer A is a different version than card B from manufacturer A, and it took the frame down. Oops.
Yep.
One way to address that, to chime in there, is if there is an API.
Don't do that.
Well, don't do that. and unfortunately, it happens. We see that in SAN systems with RAID firmware, and we might have 12 RAIDs, and one of them is on an older version. It's like, why is this one having problems all the time? And over time, you'll finally realize after days or weeks of trying to figure and pinpoint it, and you put that into your monitoring system if there's an API or a way to grab it,
Well, so I'm
and then you
gonna
put
go one
alerts
better.
around it.
So I believe that in the New World Order of documentation, that maybe version management,
Oh, sure.
the way we used to have, the way we have cable management and IP management, that you have version management, that for every application you have, for every firmware that you have, that you identify it by the part, by the year, and by the version, so that when you get the new one, maybe the first question you ask the vendor, whoever it is it going to be backwards compatible to what I have? And the other comical thing about versions, which is always entertaining, and software updates. The AWS guy, is he still here? So
Todd?
everybody who
You scared
does
them away.
automatic updates on their
Jamie?
systems, please raise their hand. Whoops. So the other thing we have, which I'm sure you know, is that when you update one application, it's a lot of moving parts. Because in the world of documentation, who has a document that shows which application communicates to the other application, and whether it's using JSON, whether it's using XML, whether it's using something else communicating, and then pointing to what the string is or what the command is or the API is, that when you update product A, and product A automation might talk to 5 or 10 or 50 other things, that they don't really talk to that anymore because they didn't get updated. So how many things break upstream and downstream as you start to tie applications together, and how do we document that? And that's a great open question, so that while you had a nice diagram that said, I have all these services in this box, and then you had one line that went across. So how do we put a spider diagram together, and how does that look, so that as we're going to a very software-centric world, we now know what applications talk to other applications, what is moving, is it media moving, is it command moving, you know, VLAN diagrams. I mean, do we know what VLAN talks to other VLANs? Where's the permission set? And it's not by a user, but, you know, KVM takes networks down. Does everybody figure that out yet? Okay, fine. So we know that it lives by itself, but media doesn't. So we have to come up with new methodologies and new ways to document things that, we care about when we are either troubleshooting it or on more regular basis. You didn't really put new firmware in a tape machine, but about every 15 minutes, you're updating something somewhere soft in some system and making sure that you didn't break the other 5 systems that are attached to it.
I think it's important also that this is also part of the people issue, because you have people in the vendor side and, who don't understand the broadcast and media world and some of these things. And one example was one of my customers was Verizon Digital Media Systems. Macha, I don't know if you knew about this, but, and we had a monitoring system that was every single hub office. So there must have been 50 of them around the country or something, and everyone. And managed all these devices and things. And so one day they sent out a replacement modular card to one of the sites. And it didn't work, and they called back to the factory and said, well, this doesn't work. They said, oh, no, you need to upgrade your version of management. It's like, oh, I see, because you sent me this one card, I have to upgrade my management software across 50 sites, and take everything down while I do it, and it's like, I think we need a better solution than that,
Well, we've learned some of the techniques to deal with this for the 2110 and the 2022 world. And it's happened because you've put 50 to 75 vendors with 100 different products into a room and slammed the door shut and said, you're not coming out until they all work together. And it's quite literally that sort of statement.
Yeah.
And the first interop that we participated in at Fox Houston's facility, they used a Google Doc because there was so much data that had to get into this Google Doc. It was a gigantic spreadsheet, had 15 tabs on it and columns for this and that, and they broke it. They actually broke Google Docs.
Yeah,
It had
I
so
can
much
imagine.
data, and
Yeah.
Google fixed it by us requesting them to fix it. They just opened up some key and got it reworking it. But we literally bring each piece of equipment in to these scenarios, and they're quarantined. They're not allowed onto the network until they meet a certain set of standards and perspectives. And once that is met, all the boxes go from red to green. Then it can join the network, at which time the whole tests all go through, or all gone through again.
But then who writes up that spec so that when the next guy comes in, he can actually match it, as opposed to just coming in and learning the hard way?
Well, there's a lot of honesty that has to go on there, because if you go screw your software up after you've gone from red to green, and you land on the network and the whole place goes down, there's a whole lot of finger pointing going on.
Yeah, but just even things like, configurations. Well, okay, so we all know that every piece of software we own has a profile or a configuration. And it's always saved somewhere in some deep file somewhere, or in the configuration folder, until the box fails, or until you get the new box and you have to mimic the profile or the configuration. So the same thing, where is it being tracked, how is it being tracked, and how is it being managed,
Well,
so
I
that as new systems come online, you have the ability to
with hats off to some of the manufacturers that have been in this for 2 or 3 years already. They are developing tools in the background, and some of them have them commercially available to track all of the things that are going on in the system. And I'll pick on one company in particular, Evertz. They had to develop a product called Insight that looks at that entire system, tracks trends, looks at all the data, collects it, and so forth. So when something does go up in the air or down in most cases, they've got a way to go back through the system and see what might have happened, including any software change that's made, any new addition, all the paths and all the flows are all monitored in this box. It's a gigantic database, big data system. But, that may be what we have to get through for the next 2 or 3 years or 4 years or something like that.
And you need to do more than just log the technology and the data and traffic. You need to log also user actions to a very granular level, because what I found, you put a new system in, and there's obviously resistance from operators and stuff. And at first you're putting out the bugs, and they're saying, well, this didn't this didn't work right, and you go and you find this thing. But eventually you get down to a point where you've figured out all the technical bugs and you got them out. Now it's all operator things. So they're saying, oh, it still didn't play this. And you go, no, you put it in manual. It didn't do this. You didn't load it. And you start realizing now we're down to just the operators who are being resistant and still blaming the equipment when it's no longer the equipment.
And you have to play hardcore and establish policies. And if if your people don't adhere to the policies, they're written up or they're exited out the door. That's.
But you have to build the policies, and even, for example, it works. So we all built it, it all works, it's perfect. And now it's 6 months later.
How about 6 hours?
And somebody just decided to troll the website of one of the products, and oh my God, there's an update. Okay.
Questions out here, Dennis?
I think kind of one thing that I'm getting from what Gary is asking is, who's going to end up writing the pre-flight for the next one? Because, the implementations I've been on, and I've been on some bleeding edge ones, is, what happens before any equipment hits the building? Who's doing all that pre-flight? Who's doing all that testing? And then I think, the Evertz software that gathers all that information, then, we have to curate that and log that and then, use that to come up for the next implementation. I think that's kind of what I'm hearing from Gary. Who's building?
But also,
who's
does it
building
talk to
that
other
stuff?
Things besides Evertz.
Well, that's a whole.
Yeah, well, no, but that was just the one he used.
Yeah.
But that, that has been successful for all of us for a long time. Having that pre-flight checklist, having that, all of that information ahead of time, so you're testing and you're lining it out. Because as you know, so I think a lot of you getting that as well. If that first week of implementation is hard for the end users, you've kind of lost them. You really got to make sure it comes out, at least that first week good, so that, that sell point is good and that you get the buy-in from your team.
I actually kind of want to follow up this point. So it's a point I've made before, maybe even in this very room, and I'm not trying to be too pointed with this, but I think we could all stand to maybe step back a moment, take a few deep breaths, and realize we're not the first industry to get eaten by software and IP and all of this stuff. We're the last. And frankly, there's people floating around in space right now, and in fighter jets, and in tanks, and in submarines, whose lives literally depend on these types of integrated platforms using these types of technologies to keep breathing. And I think we would do well to maybe observe how some of the processes evolved in these other industries, these other spaces, because they had to deal with it often for things a lot more on the line than maybe putting TV on the air, which we all feel very strongly about and we all love. But But I think it's a thought, and there are lessons that were learned over the last several decades by many industries, whether manufacturing or transportation, and sometimes it's good to just take a step back and look at things from some other perspectives that have dealt with similar challenges.
I totally agree with that, but one comment to that is I feel, and I'd love to hear your guys' thought on this as well, that in our industry in particular, every piece of software is beta. We're in a beta world. And I know that extends in the consumer world a lot as well. Everyone's got bugs on their phones and bugs on every system they have because everything is perpetually in beta.
But isn't that the nature of continuous improvement?
It is,
Continuous
but,
iteration?
but there's also a requirement for stability in certain industries. And for various reasons, I think that's overlooked in the media industry a lot, in the technology, because we're trying to be so bleeding edge and we're trying to adopt the next camera format or the next spec or be the first one to, to use that technology and get the name out there, that a lot of people are overlooking the fact that everything is pretty beta and they need to be put in dev systems, they need to be tested, they need to be rolled out properly.
We're at a cultural change, though, because we have trained engineers that failure is not an option
Right.
and don't take risks.
And now we want to train them to fail
And
fast.
all of these things are, take some risks, take calculated risks, but take some risks. Recognize that you are going to fail and fail, don't fail big, fail small. But it's a fundamental change in the culture that we have trained people for years and years to do things differently. And we're going to have to make that change.
You're exactly right, John. And what it is that we have entered into a software development cycle. And the software development cycle is ever growing and ongoing. It's not like, within the hardware space where you get this box, it works, and until you have to do a firmware or software update, later on, it works out of the box. Software development, I know some of the companies that we're talking to, their cycle of development is every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks there is a change, and you have to be ready for that change. They tell you that they test it to no end before they release it. Now, you can believe them or not, that's up to you, but,
They can only test so far.
that's right, they can only test it within their space.
There are too many
They
permutations
cannot
for them
test it
ever to
within our
test all these
environment,
things.
but we have to train our engineers that you are now thinking of this differently. And it is not only to fail small, but to fail fast and recover quickly.
But also to recognize consumers are too.
That's it.
Netflix has had a history where they've
Yeah.
had hour-long outages on weekend nights.
That's
And
it.
people live through that. They're okay with
Yeah.
it.
Well,
Yeah.
and
As we
Netflix
move
even
more
forces
OTT,
themselves to have
we'll probably
outages.
have some spinning disc on those screens.
And I mean, let's be honest, there are some companies that use us as, their alpha. They will release software knowing that there are issues,
No
but
vendor
they're
would ever do
waiting
that
for
to you,
us
Renard.
to actually
I think you're malign.
Yeah, there you go.
Speaking of vendors, Craig Sears.
Karl defined it. Karl said they call it a partnership. I like that.
I'm wondering if this maybe just needs a name in a way. I mean, we had the DIT for a while, right? We have the media manager. We've had tech managers. There's, in other industry, there's a nurse practitioner, which filled in where a doctor didn't quite need to be there. So what if I've been staring at this word for these days, but what if we invented the concept and we start training BITs? Broadcast IT people.
Yes.
And just call it that, which is already what it is, instead of a polarity of I don't want to do this.
And ABC
I was
did it years
actually,
ago.
I was actually
Yeah.
at CNN when they actually renamed everybody BITs.
IT
Yeah.
people, you
Went
train
from
them.
bits.
Broadcast IT specialist. There you go, bits. I love it.
People, you train
Now we're Bits by the Bay. Welcome, guys. You have a new title. You're all Bits. And someday you'll grow up to be
Okay.
Bytes.
You have one problem with your concept of bits is that we all work for large companies that have corporate IT people who think they're in charge. So we have to convince them first that broadcasting is important and that we need to pay attention to that, and it doesn't fit into a standard business model IT environment. Good luck to that.
But you act like the IT guys are gods in your company, and you're not. And it reminds me of the guy walking down the street, and you walk by somebody who's tending to his beautiful garden in his front yard, and he goes, "Boy, you and Mother Nature have done a beautiful job here." And he said, "Yeah, you should see what Mother Nature was doing all by herself before." So
I think, at least my experience is that in the business model of a station, you have sales, you have news production, and then you have the people who make it all work in the background. And oftentimes they forget about those guys that work in the background. We just work the magic and we make it all happen. And so they're more interested in the 9 to 5, dealing with the sales, and we got to get, the traffic log and stuff, and that all stuff, doesn't really fit into our world very well.
Well, you do make a good point. I think one of the things that we have to look at is that the definition of broadcasting has changed. I tend not to use the term broadcasting. Basic premise of what we do is ingest, process, and deliver. So I talk more about content delivery and distribution. So when you have the gods come down and they tell you how great they are and so forth, I ask the simple question: are you delivering at the end of it all? Are you the one delivering? Are you the one here 24/7? Because the answer to that is no. This group is the group that's here 24/7. When the rain happens, when the hurricane happens, when the flood happens, our teams are still going in and making sure that there is something on air. Now, granted, we're not heart surgeons, but we do save lives at times. And I think it's very important for us to remember that, I grew up in reading some of the people out here. I read your papers in college. And to me, those were the gods, and that was something that was very important. And granted, IT is, to me, nothing more than a platform. It is a platform by which we, as broadcasters, are now going to start using to do exactly what we're supposed to do, which is deliver content. Now, granted, we have to learn how to work in the same space and work together, but we can either learn to do that, or I can guarantee you we're all going to fail. And those IT people may be able to go off and go, in the financial district or something like that. We're going to have to be looking at, okay, what's our next step? So I think don't look at it as them coming down. If they decide to come down off of Mount Olympus, that's great. If they don't, then you climb Mount Olympus and do what you need to do.
That was beautiful. I mean, I'm not kidding. It is not us versus them anymore.
Yeah.
We're all in it together. We are an industry together. And they don't care about packets because, if your email drops a couple packets, you don't even know.
Right.
We do, and we can explain to them why
exactly
we do.
why.
We're breaking down those walls, and they don't want to be there 24/7.
No.
They'll leave that to us, but okay, well, build me a network that can handle it.
That's it.
They go, okay, I can do that. So you don't call me.
That's it.
And they'll make it twice as stable, so they don't get a call at 2 a.m.
That's it.
because I'll call them. So absolutely.
Yeah, a
Mr.
common
Gorbachev,
problem that we run into is you have various different pieces of the broadcast equipment that needs to work together. And so you have to have certain protocols and certain ports open, and you have to have certain VLAN set up to make that work that they don't really want working on their network. And they will let you know it's their network, not yours.
It's the company's network.
And I'm like, well,
And the company
how
pays
is
me
that supposed to
just
work
like
then?
They pay them. Right? Someone asked about software updates. In our post-production environment, we have an IT-based image. It's no longer segmented out. It can reach the internet. And you know what? The IT guys don't want you surfing porn on their machines either. Just like we don't want you surfing porn on the post-production machines. And so they built a base image. We put our application layer on top of it, and they go, we got to roll patches. And we go, can I get it in advance to test it? And they go, no, it's a security flaw. And we're like, push it. If it breaks everything, can we roll it back?
That's it.
And if not, then it's all hands on deck. Can we fix it? Calling our partners, right, to help us. And otherwise, we got to break down the us versus them. It's becoming one unit.
No doubt. Now, one of the things that, I actually train administrators for Avid, and most of the administrators now are IT people. And part of that training is having the conversation with them of what the difference is between corporate IT and a media-aware IP network. And one of the lines I use with them is I say, hey, what is your job in a content creation facility as an IT administrator? And, they run off and say a bunch of things and this and that. And at the end, I tell them, no, we have one job and one job only, and that is to remove all obstacles from the creative process. That's what we do. That's what I'm going to teach you how to do here. And then they start to understand it. I've had some really good success with IT people. I did AARP, which was nothing. I mean, they had no video at all, anything, zero, zip. And it was a real war with their IT people. But eventually they got it. Eventually they got the difference. And so I think if if we as broadcasters, and I don't use broadcasters anymore either, Renard, I say content creators, as we as content creators start to talk to them about what it is we need and get them to understand that they cannot introduce the same overhead into the system that they do when they're securing emails and these documents and things like that. You know, it is a struggle.
Oh, yeah.
But it does eventually come around. And you know, we've had some success with, you know, some large corporations that have, you know, had to move into creating content for their bottom line, and with large corporations that are now, you know, buying up every local station in the country, you know, to move into that area. And so it's going to take some work, as Rob said, and as Jim here, but I think we can do it, you know, if we take the time to truly explain it to them.
And you have to continue to have that conversation. You really do, because you're exactly right. You know, they're not going to hear you the first, the second. You know, they say it takes 9 times for someone to actually hear you. You're going to have to continue to have that conversation to get there. And every organization is different. But until we do get there, we're going to constantly be in this infinite loop of going around and around and around with struggling for who's in charge.
Would any of you be able to speak to network security? Peter and I had some conversations about that perhaps next year we'll focus more on network security, but Peter observed that, I believe it was you who said that Amazon's got a full-time workforce devoted, a team of 150 employees that do nothing but try to break AWS. Could you guys share with us and give us a preview what perhaps you might speak to next year about security in the cloud and on-prem and the connection between the cloud and premises?
Security, it's important. Do it.
It's
Don't do it yourself. Get somebody else to do it.
Yeah.
Bring in the security
Yes, that's
guy.
it.
You
Bring
just said the internet word.
The internet does work.
The I word.
I did.
So in the media land, the I word is a taboo word. You're cloud-based, and while AWS may do a great job in the cloud, what about the communication to the cloud and keeping your network safe?
It's encrypted.
So
One of
there's-
those.
So the comment about the performance impact of things like scanning and KVM, I think was
Threats.
Modern computing is pretty damn powerful. we run our Avid clients, are pretty powerful machines, and we remote into them from afar. We run a scan, not an active scan, but we scan them regularly and make sure they're okay. Yes, there is a way behind, and we try and limit, what they can access. We discourage.
But are you running network threat detection? Are you running
Yep.
intrusion protection?
And all goes through
endpoint and all of that stuff?
Endpoint, all through firewalls and endpoint protections, and I didn't build that system. I went to IT and said, how do we make this secure? Because I don't need to. I can save a lot of money if I don't put 3 machines in every edit suite. If I put one powerful one, and they can give the clients or the editors what the tools they need to do. How do I make that happen? They go, oh, we'll protect you upstream. Okay, that sounds great.
Yeah, the rise of the CISO, the chief intelligence security officers in this business is going to be something that we see very, very quickly start to rise in all of our organizations. And what I can say is that with us, it's beyond just firewalls. There's also a series of DMZs. So, you may get through a firewall and sit there, but you're not going to get through a DMZ without us actually, noticing it. And we have a security officer. That's what his team of 1 right now does. And that's really focused on the media side of the business. Now, there is a corporate side that they also have, all kinds of things and all kinds of alerting and everything. But we have a person who's really sitting there to do just that.
Glued to our needs.
That
and
is
our
it,
networks.
to
Yep,
our
absolutely.
needs. So
they recognize
yeah.
that as a need.
I think to Nick's point earlier, though, we're late to the party here.
Oh, yeah.
The financial industry has solved this. Lots of other industries have solved this. It's we just need to
They
learn.
run much faster than we run.
And they're good targets, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ron?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question. Rick beat me to it a little bit, but cybersecurity has been my little pet project for the last little while, and I sure would love to see us put it on the agenda next year.
Well, that was
when I interface with IT guys, my big story when we talk about disaster recovery and about NIST frameworks and stuff like that is I say, okay, your disaster recovery is a 1 hour or 3 hour or 3 day recovery. In our world, our disaster recovery is 50 milliseconds, right? I mean, we got to switch over in redundant systems, and we can't really put off too much stuff. But there are existing frameworks right now. The NIST framework, National Institute of Standards Technologies, MPAA has come out with their own set as well. I've seen compliance requirements of those in documents. And ISO 27001's been around for a while, and to John's point, we're late to the party on that. Under ISO 27001, you have to be able to audit your cloud infrastructure or wherever your data center is, wherever they're running your virtualized applications. And that includes being able to do pen testing and that kind of stuff. So we need to learn from that, and we got an opportunity here in front of us to do something a little different.
Yeah, and NABA has also put out a best practices as well document that for us, for any of the RFPs or RFIs that we're writing now, it includes the MPAA document and it includes the NABA document. And if a company cannot at least meet those basic requirements, pretty much don't even get into the door for part of the party.
Yeah, one last comment to that, Renard, is that under ISO, and there's a requirement that you have an Itil configuration management system in place. So when you do introduce new software or updates, you're not introducing vulnerabilities to a system that's stable and has been recognized and secure. And that addresses the question we had point we made a little earlier, people putting software updates and this not being compatible with the others. We as an industry need to be able to insist on that kind of configuration control within a cybersecurity framework, but also from a disruption of our core broadcast operations. So we're not changing by the minute, we're changing by the week or the month or whatever, so we have time to do it right. So I would vote to put it on the agenda next year, Peter.
So what else would you like to hear on the agenda next year? Let's have some ideas. Anybody?
I just want to dovetail into that. The problem is that sometimes you call for support with certain providers, and they won't provide you the support until you install the latest version update.
Yeah.
So even if I do versioning support all the time, I mean, I'm like, we've got versioning locked in. We're not, everything's here at the same level. One machine has a hiccup. You call in, it's like, okay, you got to install it now.
Because we fixed it in the version 3 about later in yours.
And then, going to see if I can go and spread that around.
That's why we go to microservices. Thank you. So we can
I just like to see workflow and change management and some of those things about the people part of this that the panel has been discussing.
All right, John, you're on.
All right.
We're going to put together a super session for me.
non-technical white paper on
All right.
alignment.
Right. What else do you want to hear about next year?
Only one person said the word blockchain to me.
2 years. 2 years. Too soon? 2 years on blockchain.
You have to bring Michelle here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Any what other topics?
The resurgence of analog. No.
We'll bring you the Victrola. All right, there you go. And nothing else? Really? We covered it all?
Well, if James is not going to say it, I guess I'll have to bring up the word archives.
Okay.
I figured that would be a better way to get it in.
But archives are where things go to die. What are you talking about?
Preservation and restoration.
The documentation thing that we both talked about yesterday and Gary mentioned again today, I think that's a very important thing that we should take a look at. Is, what's the documentation of the future going to look like? What's going to be paper? What's going to be electronic? How is it going to cover the various layers of our, our stacks, whether they be protocol stacks or, technical stacks?
Was the documentation now going to be something you create and it's done, or is it dynamic and it's electronic?
Dynamic.
And it's self-documented. I mean, because really what you want is a monitoring control system that is your documentation.
It's as static as version change.
Yeah, well, that's
How
not
about that? So as long as versions never change,
And we want
as
version
long as
management
applications
tools.
don't get updated, it's
Right?
static.
I mean, yeah. So I mean, we're moving to software-defined documentation.
Documents, the version,
I should patent that right now.
The build number and the IPs, we do that already. The only thing we don't do is the last part that you mentioned, which I
where you have to pull the card out.
Oh, the
to
little
look at
part where
record.
how software talks to each other?
Well, no, we have the diagrams that show how they talk and what they talk, and is it storage, and is it IP, and if it's IP, what flavor of IP, and what the VLANs are, and what are private IP VLANing versus public IP VLANing. And, we don't have the luxury of going to the internet in many cases or the cloud because we've got one gateway. We've got a gigabit per second gateway, but that gateway is getting hammered by the Eastern Europeans all freaking day, all the time, 7 days a week. And so, part of our decision-making process about whether or not, beyond the Copyright Act and whether or not we can go to the cloud, for the portion that we can go to the cloud today, the 20% of our content that is not covered under the copyright law that doesn't allow us to go to the cloud, for that 20%, we can't go to the cloud today because we have one internet gateway and everything for the enterprise, including our website, loc.gov, goes through that one gateway. And when it starts getting hammered, and it does constantly, we can tell because our email suddenly starts spinning and our web pages start spinning, and suddenly anything that's dependent on that goes down.
So get another gateway.
So wait a second. So if you have,
what the problem is.
I never thought of that.
so if you have all these templates, will you share?
Absolutely.
But I guess the question is, if we're moving to software-defined networks, shouldn't we have software-defined documentation?
Well, that's the other part of it. What does the AutoCAD of the future need to look like? Because we use 3 different software packages: AutoCAD, FileMaker Pro, and Visio. None of which.
But those are
each
still
other.
basically written documentation
They
tools.
are.
They're not
So what does the
software-defined
future need
documentation.
to look like? What's the software application that's dynamically linked going to be that will serve those functions and give us the other functions that we need?
I was
There
kind
was
of
never
hoping.
one application. I mean, we had, you have textual applications for instruction sets. You have spreadsheets for a variety of different things. Relational databases handle other things.
I'm not
drawing
advocating
does it.
for a single thing because, single point of failure too. But, what is that thing? What does it have to look like?
Yeah.
What's our SOW for that?
I think that's really the thing, is that more importantly, templating out what it looks like, not the tool you need to make it. Template out what it looks like, and then after it's templated out in each of the sets of information capture, then figure out what the best tool is to use it.
Yeah. What do we need as an industry? Who's going to solve the problem?
Well,
Artificial
I
intelligence.
There was a slide that had the 12 different monitoring tools
Yeah,
that we
yeah.
use. It's all dynamic.
Well,
Every
and-
single one of
Yeah.
them is what's on that machine. And talk
Exactly.
about this machine has a card with a different firmware.
You don't even know what machine it's going to run on. You're in the cloud.
I'm not going to look at it.
Right.
You also need some management tickler, not a calendar, that says, okay, fine, something came in, do I make sure I check it so I have a failure? Oh, I have a great one. So 2 weeks ago, I had discontinued products and an entire environment full of discontinued products. So we decided critical care was to order as many spares of discontinued products we could gather, easy. And it took a couple of weeks for the vendor, who might have gone through some changes in acquisitions, to get back. And a new guy calls up and said, oh, there's more stuff discontinued, so I'm just going to replace it with this. Oops. No. Take it off the list. Well, no. Don't you want it? No, I wanted the thing that replaces what I have. The thing that you're going to give me isn't going to work, is it? Oh, I don't know. I have to ask somebody else. Good. Take it off the list. So your point about, those are the things where you have to pay attention to the versioning, and not forensically, but dynamically, so that as things change, you don't get clobbered, when something comes along for the ride and all of a sudden you realize you have a problem.
I think you're making the argument to move to the cloud.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you're doing. That's what I hear. I mean, because then it's not your problem
It's not
anymore.
your problem.
Who here
You're
thinks
moving
Peter
to whatever
likes
you
the
want,
cloud?
and you're doing microservices and constant upgrades, and you know what?
They might be doing upgrades right now. I have
Yes,
no idea.
yes, exactly.
Just
What-
from a suggestion standpoint,
Yeah.
and Rob actually just alluded to it a little bit, but I would love for this to be something we dive into a little, because I think we think of it as maybe most resistant to migration to the cloud, is cloud-based and remote editorial and post-production processes, both from a technological and a workflow perspective, because I know we've been doing a lot of thinking lately at Chesapeake about you might actually be able to redefine some entire approaches to what collaboration even starts to look like and what core technologies are required by moving some of this into cloud and virtual machines.
And you said editorial, not editing.
Well, the same. Editing and just other kind of, again, heavy post-production processes that we think of as being most resistant to moving into the cloud, because some people are starting to experiment with that stuff.
Regis kind of got into that a bit in his presentation, but in a very over.
Greg.
There was the REMI thing that NEP did with Australia. It would be interesting to see some case studies a year from now regarding, they're using video conferencing so that the director can be seen remotely in terms of, the fact you don't have nonverbal communication between people in the control room because they're not all in the control room.
Right.
Something like that might be worth checking.
We do that today for remote production. Remote editing, remote supervising in edit sessions, I should say. Gotta be careful with this one. So yeah, I can have a producer do a supervised session that's in LA with the editor in Silver Spring. It's
Well, if I could throw it. And I'd like to throw out some archiving.
You want to throw out your archives?
We have enough tapes. No more tapes, please. But some ideas on if we do want to do an archiving track next year, especially archiving in a cloud-based era, because that does mean that things need to be done differently. The SLAs are different from what they're doing versus what they need to do to specify how their potential vendors, need to store things, what kind of metadata, what kind of production processes. There is a material difference. We've learned the hard way because we've got 130 years of content, and we know what we would have liked to have had as metadata, as descriptive data, as, just input into really 3M. Did you really need to change that formula in 1973? It would have been nice. We've got a lot of experience in that area, and there are some other folks who do too. And I think starting to ask those questions in the cloud-based era about, not only the processes that get our stuff into and out of the cloud, but also the man behind the curtain, asking as part of your SLAs, as part of your contracts, what are the technologies you're actually using in there? Because when it comes to long-term storage, like a century or longer, that actually becomes a very important part of the potential survivability of your content. Is, fine, the cloud has an SLA, but are you storing it on tape? Are you striping it across hard drives? Are you putting it in SSDs? That has a material effect when you're going 14 or 15 whole data migrations in 100 years. That has material effects.
But you're also assuming to some degree that the cloud provider you're talking about will be here 100 years from now. And we're
I'm not, though.
We're sort of like railroads on the cusp of the airplane industry and jet industry taking over, and we're trying to migrate into that world.
You've missed the point. The point is your vendors of the next 5 to 10 years, the names we have today, most of them, many of them may not be around in 10 years.
Oh, no.
But
going to be the Eastern Airlines
and
Pan Ams.
And we have to think today about how do we front load the process to make sure that whoever comes in 10 to 50 years, we have prepared the best data set for them so that it has the best chances of survival. We have asked the right questions. We have put the right SLAs in place. We have created the right metadata standards and file standards and whatever else standards need to be out there, documentation standards, that we have done that so that the data sets we are creating today and putting in the cloud have the best chance of surviving just to make it to that next generation of vendors.
But I have a question for you. Survivability in a cloud-based world is a little sentence that probably has a much bigger back end to it, because I think everybody is so anxious to get it all into the cloud, and once it gets there,
try and get it back out again.
Is there any? What is the concept of survivability, and what does it mean individually?
In the cloud, as a collective industry, when we have those zettabytes in the cloud, there is going to be a certain percentage, and it's probably going to be a scary percentage of stuff that is never going to come back out again.
Isn't that true of your storage tech library or your mass tech?
Well, yes, but we have control of that environment, and we know the failure modes. But as customers, if we go into the cloud, we don't know the failure modes, and that's part of the questions we have to ask as informed consumers.
I agree. They're important questions, but they're the same questions that you're asking of your own vendors. It's the same exact question.
Not exactly.
How did you move it
Not
over
exactly.
here into a Glacier or a deep archive? How do I get it back? Who does the controls? Where are the hooks?
All right, you two will fight over with crab hammers this one later a little
Actually,
bit.
we will violently agree on this. We're two sides of the same coin. We're going at the same point in the opposite direction.
All right, so a couple things. First, if you do not collect these sorts of things and you leave your lanyard and credential and back there, we'll recycle, and that saves money, and it's green. So if you don't use them, do that. Anybody here use the guidebook app this year?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. All right. So some people. Good. All right. I want to thank Data Video and Ensemble Designs, who were in kind and lent us the equipment that we're using over here to actually record everything today. And what else? I'll thank all our sponsors. Did you guys have a good time? Good food? Good. Okay. Good presentations. Excellent. All right. And I thank you, our panel. Any last thoughts before we let them go? Because we're running out of time here. No, we're good. We solved all the world's problems.
Done.
Can I make an
Until
AI
next
crack?
year.
Excellent. All right. So, if you,
One
Ron.
last thing, Peter.
Presentation's going to be available.
That's what I was about to
actually
do.
that's
That's
what
what-
I had the note here and I couldn't figure out why. So I'm on the website. We'll put the programs up on the SMPTE DC webpage of the SMPTE website. We will post the programs. I'll probably get most of the programs posted tomorrow, the PDFs, and then probably take us a few more days or whenever Rick finds time to get the videos posted. And so we'll look for links, and I will send something out to all of you who registered. Most of you did, or all of you did, with an update when that's done as well.
Great.
And thank you.
Great. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. If you want to stay and help us blitz the room, great. Otherwise, we'll see you hopefully across the street for some hard shell crabs in 45 minutes.